When we last met at the beginning of session to lay out our Republican principles going forward for the session, we started by reminding all of you and all of the citizens that the goal of the legislature in a short session and our constitutional obligation is to make adjustments midterm to the adopted budget. And we are proud today to stand together as Republicans with our alternative midterm adjustments. Not long ago, Governor Malloy stood before the legislature and presented his midterm adjustments. He presented a budget with increased spending, a budget that continued to rely on the largest tax increase in history, and a budget that made no attempt to make efficiencies or savings or reduce spending. Today we are producing a very different vision for the people of the state of Connecticut. A vision that spends $28 million less than the adopted budget, actual cuts to spending, $343 million less than what has been proposed by Governor Malloy, a budget that fully keeps our commitment to education, our commitment to pension reform, our commitment to public safety above and beyond what's been presented by the governor, a budget that is gap compliant, a budget with a surplus projected of $92.4 million, and a budget that we believe demonstrates once again that as Republicans we can show there is a better way, a more fiscally responsible way to lead the state of Connecticut. And with that, I'd like to introduce the House Republican leader, Larry Cafero.
Thank you, John. As John indicated, this is not a Republican budget. This is a Republican legislator's alternative to the midterm adjustments made by the governor, and we anticipate to be made by our Democratic colleagues later today in appropriations. Let's get right to the point. The adopted budget, the budget that we adopted less than a year ago, called for a spending level in 2013, fiscal year 2013, which begins on July 1st, of $19,918.3 million. It also called for lapses, and a lapse, for the public, is anticipated savings. Yes, we appropriated X, but somehow, some way, we're going to save Y. And the Y, in the case of what was budgeted, was $965.9 million for a net general fund spending of $18.9 billion. The governor proposed to actually increase that amount, to increase it to $19.3 billion. In the budget that we are presenting today to our colleagues in appropriations and subsequently on the floor of the House, we propose spending $18.9 billion, or as John indicated, $28 million less than what was actually appropriated or budgeted for in 2013, and about $342 million less than what the governor says. Our lapse number, our anticipated savings number, is $188.8 million. And let me explain. The governor's lapse number in his adjustment that he made in February is $128.4 million. But the governor includes $92 million of what he calls unallocated lapses, meaning savings we'll get from somewhere. We have removed that $92 million, and we have supplanted what we believe this state and the CBAC agreement has contractually obligated us to do. $90 million in employee suggestions and $50 million in information technology savings. That's what was contracted for. That's what we are going to hold the unions to. In addition to that, we have, as John indicated, appropriated $50 million, the same amount as the governor has, for gap compliance. However, the difference is the governor's surplus number was $1.6 million, and our surplus number is $92.4 million. I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Larry. Obviously, as Republicans, we have long believed and continue to believe that the governor and the budget passed by the Democrats with the largest tax increase in state history has hurt families and people across the state of Connecticut, particularly the middle class. And during a recession, those tax increases hurt even more. One of the things that we wanted to make a priority was we need to spend less, we need to be more efficient. And by doing that, we have been able to provide some of that tax relief back to the people of the state of Connecticut. So our budget restores the property tax credit back to its $500 amount, which is perhaps one of the single biggest tax breaks we can give to the middle class. Our budget restores the sales tax exemption for clothing of under $50, critically important to all people in the state of Connecticut. Our budget restores the sales tax exemption for non-prescription drugs. And the total of those tax breaks, it's $150 million for the property tax credit, $141 million for the sales tax exemption on clothing, $17.5 million for the sales tax exemption on non-prescription drugs. Much needed relief for the people of the state of Connecticut. Finally, our budget, consistent with where we've been for the last 6 years, caps the gross receipts tax and prevents a future tax increase from occurring in July of 2013.
As we've all learned recently, unfortunately, there is fraud in the state of Connecticut in some of the programs that we administer. What has been sort of the poster child of that was the DSNAP program. Long before DSNAP was even a household name, the Republicans believed that there was an excessive amount of fraud that was going on in our Medicaid programs and many of our social service programs. Right now, our fraud prevention unit for Medicaid is located in the Division of Criminal Justice. 75% of everything that goes on in that office is reimbursed to us by the federal government. The salaries, the benefits, the pencils, the light bills, everything is 75% reimbursed by the federal government. Currently, we only have 9 people in our division of Medicaid fraud. Having spoke to the director of Medicaid fraud, he has verified that for each person that we add, $7 million more of fraud detection and recovery could take place. We therefore recommend increasing the personnel in the Medicaid fraud division from 9 to 21 people, which will bring in an additional $84 million. Keep in mind that that additional expense of increasing that number will be paid for and subsidized by the federal government to the tune of 75%. In addition to that, we looked at our DSS, Department of Social Services Department. And what is illogical, if you will, is that their fraud division within that is within the same division. So what I mean is there's a natural conflict. As you can imagine, it might be difficult for people who are assigned to detect fraud in a division that would make their very division look bad. So what we're saying is, first of all, let's move the fraud unit out of DSS and put it in the Division of Criminal Justice. Currently, there are 24 people who work in the Division of in the Fraud Division of the Department of Social Services. Each person, and this has been verified by the department, is responsible and will prevent $700,000 per year worth of fraud. We recommend increasing the number of people who work there to 26 more people for a total of 50 people that would work in the new Division of DSS Fraud, which would be located in the Division of Criminal Justice. In addition to that, last year, we as a state created a policy known as the Earned Income Tax Credit. It was a piggyback on the federal program. The IRS has declared that there's a 28% fraud in the Earned Income Tax Credit federally. We, as a state, piggyback off that. We are proposing the elimination of the Earned Income Tax Credit, a program that is brand new, that was started, has paid out once. We believe we cannot afford it any longer, and therefore we propose eliminating it.
Obviously, Some of the big news from the governor's midterm adjustments was the governor's 163-page education reform package. The governor had proposed $128 million in education reform, and we as Republicans supportive of education reform said that if we're going to spend new dollars on education reform, we must spend those dollars within existing appropriations. Indeed, we've done that and still reduced existing appropriations, as Larry indicated, by just over $28 million. Obviously, there is much work left to do on education reform. Our budget includes some $124 million in that reform, much of which mirrors what the governor has done. For example, there's magnet school money, $14 million for charter school money. There's $5 million for the chef settlement, all that had been included for the governor. There are some differences in our education package than the governor's that are important to note, and we want to highlight. First, the governor called for an additional 500 preschool slots in terms of early readiness. When the State Department of Education went out and determined how many spots are out there now in existing preschools that are open, the answer was 750. We fund those 750 preschool slots for early school readiness, 250 more slots than what the governor has offered. We have a significant increase in vocational in our vocational agricultural schools to help them reach where they need to go. They have been underfunded for years. Our budget restores the funding for VOAG schools where it should be. And in addition, we make sure that we keep those commitments for ECS, Commissioners Network, and talent development, and even add a little more money to that overall pot, which obviously needs to be determined and figured out as we move forward on education reform. Thanks, Larry. I missed the cue. Another part of our budget, which is critical, we believe, and again shows a contrast to the governor's in the area of public safety. I think all of us who serve an elective office understand that we can debate and disagree over how much role government should have, but I think one area of commonality is that all of us believe that a primary, if not principal, goal of government is public safety, a protection of the people of the state of Connecticut. So with respect to public safety in our budget, we take two very different steps than Governor Malloy and the Democrats. The first step is to eliminate the early release program for violent offenders. We keep the early release program for nonviolent offenses and eliminate it completely for violent offenders. There's been cases already in the state of Connecticut where people have been let out of jail who've committed horrific violent crimes. And they've been let out early, which is a breach of our word, a breach of faith, and a slap in the face of the families of the victims of those crimes. That program needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. The second thing we do is that we fully fund a class of state troopers to restore us to the statutory requirement. Although we're supportive, obviously, of a study to determine what amount may be needed in the future, we think we need public safety as a priority in our budget.
Just want to touch upon a few more priorities that we have included in our budget. As I indicated before, we do reserve $50 million, as does the governor, to continue progressing towards gap compliance. We provide the additional pension money that is now we are obligated to do under the recently amended CBAC agreement. But as I said before, we also hold the other party to the CBAC agreement, namely CBAC, to their end of the bargain, meaning we expect them to come up with their $90 million in employee suggestion savings, and we expect them to come up with their $40 additional million in information technology savings. We restore the funding to reduce the retired teacher cost-sharing increases that had been proposed by the governor. We provide $12 million in additional funding to the now what will be defunct underground storage tank program to prevent closure of gas stations. funds. We double the funding for the state's apprenticeship program. We restore the personal needs allowance for Medicaid nursing home residents. We provide an additional $1 million to implement recommendations of a recent autism study. We consolidate the 6 legislative commissions, as we have in the past, to 1 legislative commission. We provide a 1% COLA for private providers beginning January of 2013. We double the dispensing fees paid to independent pharmacies who were so devastated by the policy changes made in the last budget. We undergo the merger of watchdog agencies to restore their autonomy and independence. We bid out mental health services and privatize food service functions of our in-state prisons. We eliminate longevity for non-union employees. We have call for a 10% reduction for executive directors, legislators, and commissioners' salaries. We include additional revenue of the implementation of Sunday sales, and we eliminate the funding for taxpayer finance campaigns, as we have done in our past 4 budgets, being consistent that this is no time in these difficult times for our taxpayers to be paying for our bumper stickers and buttons. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our Republican alternative to the budget adjustments made by the governor off the budget that was adopted last year. And at this point, we'd be glad to take. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Larry, but before we take questions, this midterm adjustment proposal took a lot of work on behalf of a lot of people, and I just wanted to, can't thank all of them, but quickly thank Senator Rob Kane, Representative Craig Minor, who is not here today, who spent hours and hours as the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, all Republicans on the Appropriations Committee, and especially Lisa Hammersley from the Senate Republican office and Jared Schmidt from the House Republican office, who spent more hours than I can even count helping us put together this budget.
Thank you, John. And to that end, by the way, these aren't just talking points. They aren't just vague, abstract proposals. You'll see included in your packet every line item in the budget. And we have gone over not once, twice, 3 or 4 times, but multiple times. Various members of our caucuses have spent endless hours going over every single line item. Every single reduction that was made is listed before you, good, bad, and ugly. It's all there. All of this has been discussed and vetted with either the Office of Fiscal Analysis or the respective divisions where cuts were made. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.